Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Arturo Ortiz y soy editor de la revista Ensamble, una revista de Landucci. Quiero darles la bienvenida a este extraordinario teatro Ángela Peralta y agradecer la asistencia a esta conferencia, su asistencia a esta conferencia. En particular, quiero agradecer a los directores y cuerpos académicos de las universidades, de las escuelas de arquitectura y facultades de arquitectura de la Ciudad de México, de Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Cuernavaca, quienes colaboraron activamente en la organización de sus alumnos y de su asistencia. Asimismo, quiero agradecer a Juan Carlos Bonet, director de Cultura de la Delegación Miguel Hidalgo, y al señor delegado Víctor Romo, por abrir a la comunidad de arquitectos las puertas de este importante recinto cultural. En la revista Ensamble pensamos que el objeto arquitectónico es solo un eslabón más dentro de una cadena de procesos económicos y culturales que le dan forma a los espacios. Nos parece fundamental explicar las dinámicas donde el movimiento de aspectos políticos, legales, financieros, junto con la evolución de los procesos sociales y culturales, estructuran a la ciudad y a la arquitectura contemporánea. La ciudad y los edificios que las componen, desde nuestro punto de vista, son una expresión de las sociedades en relación con sus modos de producción históricos. Esta concepción de nuestro entorno es la principal guía editorial de nuestra revista. También pensamos que los espacios son un reflejo de las sociedades que, más allá de su representación ideológica, funcionan como un libro de texto que nos permiten ver a través de ellos las verdaderas intenciones y valores de una sociedad. Con estos criterios, la revista Ensamble abarca temáticas específicas como arquitectura y violencia, que fue el primer número, y arquitectura y sexo, que es el número que está por salir en los próximos días. Adicionalmente, hacemos un número sobre ciudades llamado Oxígeno, que intenta describir el detalle de los procesos de desarrollo en las ciudades y como consecuencia de este desarrollo, registrar las expresiones artísticas y arquitectónicas que le dan oxígeno a esa ciudad en particular. Nuestro primer número es Oxígeno Ciudad de México. Esperamos que nuestra mirada y nuestro criterio editorial contribuya a ampliar las reflexiones alrededor de la arquitectura, las ciudades, el diseño y el arte. Para presentar a nuestros invitados, los dejo con mi amiga y colaboradora de la revista, Alejandra Cuyen.
Buenas tardes. Antes que nada, quiero dar la bienvenida a Jacques Herzog. Y Pierre de Meuron. Bueno, tengo el honor de presentar al despacho de Herzog y de Meuron, dos arquitectos que revolucionan la imagen de cada ciudad que tocan. Más allá del edificio, museo o estadio construido, su obra reconstituye el entorno y transforma la dinámica social alrededor de sus proyectos. Herzog y de Meuron reconfiguran el espacio público y revitalizan hasta las zonas más abandonadas. En sus obras, priorizan la resolución material de las fachadas y consiguen una imagen formal dada por la lógica de los materiales y la construcción. Los materiales parecen determinar la arquitectura y su arquitectura parece determinar el entorno. Jacques Herzog y Pierre de Meuron fundaron su estudio en 1975 en Basilea, en una época en la que la arquitectura estaba en proceso de cambio. Hoy se encuadran entre los arquitectos que evolucionaron del estudio tradicional a la gran empresa. Su despacho cuenta con unos 200 empleados y tiene más de 400 proyectos alrededor del mundo. Herzog y de Meuron destacaron internacionalmente a través de las bodegas Dominus California, el Centro Polideportivo de Pfaffenholz en Basilea y la Tate Modern Gallery en Londres, producto de la renovación de una central eléctrica en Bankside de los años 30. La Tate Modern se abrió al público en el año 2000 y se convirtió en un ícono para la City. En ese mismo sentido, en el marco del proyecto urbanístico Hafen City, el gobierno de Hamburgo aprobó la construcción de la Filarmónica de Elba. Sobre un antiguo depósito del puerto, levantan una enorme vela de vidrio que alberga una sala de conciertos, oficinas y un hotel. En los últimos años revolucionaron la arquitectura deportiva, con los estadios de St. Jacob en Basilea, Allianz Arena en Múnich y, por supuesto, el Estadio Nacional de Pekín de los Juegos Olímpicos de 2008. Herzog de Meuron encabezan una de las líneas de creación más valoradas de la arquitectura. Se dice que cada obra dibujada en su estudio es una declaración de intenciones y cada proyecto es un modelo a estudiar. Entre los premios recibidos por el estudio destacan en 1996 el premio Max Beckmann, que les otorgó la ciudad de Frankfurt, en 1999 el premio Schock, otorgado por la Real Academia Sueca de las Artes, en 2001 el premio Pritzker, el más prestigioso en el mundo de la arquitectura, en cuyo caso el jurado alabó su constante innovación en el empleo de materiales y soluciones arquitectónicas, así como su colaboración con artistas y su interés por integrar arte y arquitectura. En 2006 le fue concedida la medalla de oro del Royal Institute of British Architects. Con ustedes, Jacques Herzog.
Es un gran placer estar aquí en Ciudad de México y hablar a ustedes. Y aunque se mejore paso a paso un poco en castellano, prefiero hablarles en inglés más tarde para ser más preciso y me siento más cómodo, aunque me guste mucho hablarles en castellano, pero quizás la próxima vez. Y parece que vamos a volver varias veces porque hay varios proyectos muy interesantes que van a llevarnos otra vez a su país y a su ciudad fantástica. Estamos muy impresionados por la calidad urbanística de la ciudad y por la variedad de tipologías y también de los problemas que hay en esta ciudad enorme. Hace 15 años fue la primera vez que fuimos a Ciudad de México, invitados en esta época por Tatiana Bilbao y Fernando Romero, que son amigos y han vuelto a ser famosos arquitectos ellos mismos. Pero claro, hay varias otras razones para venir aquí, sobre todo, claro, los proyectos, que es el pan de cada uno de nosotros, arquitectos. Como he dicho, para ser más preciso, les hablo en inglés, sobre todo porque no solo quiero presentarles proyectos que ya se conocen un poco a través de las varias publicaciones y libros, pero porque prefiero hablar de los proyectos en un cierto contexto intelectual y urbanístico, y quiero hablar del potencial de arquitectura, que es de hecho la posibilidad de arquitectura hoy. Detrás de cuestiones de forma, de belleza, de superficie y todo el resto que ya conocemos muy bien. If I speak of potentials, I would like to be more precise and try to be precise in that I try to divide the presentation in various chapters with subtitles. And maybe if there is a chance at the end of the lecture, maybe even in Castellano, we could discuss one or the other of the issues that I would present now. We are a big group here, so maybe it's not so easy, but you should know that we are very open and very interested in that kind of debate, because that's how we learn most about how we think the projects and how finally others see the projects. If we talk about potentials, this is a question beyond formal issues and morphological issues, beyond questions, as I said before, of beauty and surface, even if beauty remains perhaps the most interesting attribute architecture actually has and must have to be attractive for all of us, because beauty is certainly one of the leading forces, even political force that we are connected with in our lives. When I speak of potentials, I would start with a potential that perhaps is today the most important potential, which is public space. And if I say potential, this is perhaps the field that we believe is the field where the creativity of every architect is most demanded and most necessary, because as an architect you've been given a brief, you've been given a site and a budget and some restrictions. And the restrictions is what is the salt and the pepper in the soup of every architect and every architecture. But the really interesting thing is the potential that lies beyond that. What can you do as an architect? How can you invest your creativity to detect or to open up something that the client didn't imagine or that was not imaginable? And every project, even the smallest one, has a kind of potential that is the real field where we architects can engage ourselves. And I would like to speak exactly about that and start with the Tate Modern, which we found like this as an ex-power plant where the machines were still there and were useless. This project, we won this project based on a competition, and we were the ones who saw the potential of that space being an empty, excavated space to become the most lively public space of London. We dug it out, so if I mean potential, this is also sometimes very brutal and in a very iconoclastic way, destructive way. Sometimes you have to destroy things to rebuild them and rediscover them. So this turbine hall was unbuilt, was excavated to finally become what I said, really a space that attracts every year 5 million spectators, which is more than double than any other museum for contemporary art in the world. More than double than MoMA, for instance, in New York. And potential is not just a nice space, but it's really a crossing point and a place where people meet in the public and meet with art, but also meet without even looking at art. But it's also become a place for artists intervention. Like this image shows, for instance, sculpture by Anish Kapoor. Finally, the National Stadium is maybe the next one which in a very large scale offered such a potential. We all know its beauty, and we know also how it was PR'd all over the world and became like almost an explosion of festivity and the pride of a nation of China that should demonstrate how powerful this country is and how much they can do also in the world of arts and architecture. This is the party, and the party is soon over. After 2 or 3 weeks, this is over, and in fact was never really what interested us. It was spectacular and unbelievable, but like every Olympic stadium, post-Olympic use is very difficult, but in this case was the only thing really that interested us and was leading us to create or to fight for what was known later as the bird's nest, this naked structure that is surrounding the space for the sports, that never again will have the same kind of sportive event. But yes, it is now working as a park, like the Eiffel Tower is working as a monument for the city after its use and its useless function, so to speak, as an object for the World Exhibition and the end of the 19th century. Naked structures is also on an architectural and intellectual level a field that we explore more and more, because almost in an old-fashioned, almost in a medieval way, structure, form, space, and surface collapse in one thing. This is not about honesty, this is not about modesty, this is just about being real and being there, just there, and offering potentials for people. Like you can see all these images in a post-Olympic world where this space is the sheer attraction for the Chinese and foreigners from all over the world. For instance, this
winter, it was used as a skating rink, and they even had pistes for skiing. And another naked structure that we turned into a potential for the city is Lincoln Road in Miami, the garage that was planned just as a garage, and we found it a pity in such a central location to just do a garage and not exploit it in a new way. Especially because, like everybody who has ever been there, Lincoln Road has all the ingredients that are needed to make a nice street. It has green, is an outdoor shopping mall, not one of these boring and ugly indoor places. So we proposed a structure that is exploiting these natural conditions. And even if American architecture normally doesn't do that, even if it's a more indoor kind of an architectural tradition than an outdoor one, Miami, just like other southern cities, have an amazing advantage that is all too often unexploited, which is the climate and the lush vegetation. This here is what the garage should have been according to the city planners. Just a kind of a stupid box with stacked cars. And this is what we proposed, and we're fighting at the court to get double the height, to get the same height as the bank building next door. So the buildings would be really neighbors and would be really of equivalent importance. And we would not get 1 square meter more FAR, not more profit, but just more beauty and more functions, more attraction, more public life, more of the potential that I'm mentioning at the beginning. For this reason, the client, who was a fantastic partner and was pushing very hard for this innovation, was ready to insert and infill unexpected uses like restaurants, bar, shopping, and even his residence in this garage structure and not separated from it. We were inspired by this garage that went the other way, that sort of conquered a former theater space in Detroit and became a garage. So the garage is beautiful, but unfortunately left its urban life behind. So somehow we reversed this here and said a garage could be more than just a one monofunctional building. So we turn it into a platform for everybody. It has, of course, become a party place, a VIP place, shopping place, green area, place for artists, for leisure. And especially it was possible with this organization of this naked structure, again naked in the sense that the structure and the space and the appearance, the form is one thing. There's not one element, not one single piece that is not forming part or integrated in this holistic approach to architecture. These diagrams are showing in which way we tried ways for the cars to go up into this building, almost into kind of an artificial landscape, and leaving space for other functions, for yoga, for instance, for cars always, for gardens, for views, for double height, for single height, for compressed and more open spaces, for gardens you wouldn't expect in such a structure, expanding and extending it onto the street, so the street and the building literally merge into one thing, which is public. A totally different project, the Feltrinelli Foundation in Milan, is also one of these naked structures. The name Feltrinelli may tell you something. The father of Feltrinelli was one of the most famous publishers ever in Italy, and he was the first to translate Russian writers in a period where socialist uprising in the post-68 period in Europe was very hot, and Feltrinelli was told to be very close to terrorism. But he was a great man and intellectual, and his son has founded the Feltrinelli Foundation, which is a kind of a large library for intellectuals and researchers to be presented in the center of Milano. And this project, which we love for its urbanistic impact, is located here at Porta Volta, at the edge of a former Baroque wall, as the name says, Mura Spagnole, and somehow reconstructs and rebuilds what the city wall was in the past. It's going to sit here, and it's going to make, again, this gate that was so important to describe that feeling of what was inside and what was outside the city. So here the potential is, of course, to reconstruct somehow the reading of the city grid and to rebuild it in a contemporary way, maintaining this concept of the gate with our idea of this naked, transparent structure, and at the same time this sibling type of building that we find also in the history of Milano. There are indeed several places where copying one building, making it two out of one, has been a very successful tool to create urbanistic value. So our proposal is indeed to expand the realm of the project on the other side, and we are fighting with the city to involve this in the project. We don't know whether we will succeed, but so far the plan is allowing us to do such a second building, so this idea of the sibling could be fulfilled in the near future. We will soon start construction. The building has two sides, one which is through this transparency, allowing this contact with the garden of the former Baroque wall area, and the other side is really hardcore Milano street. Milano, which is the Lombardian city with its great urbanistic and artistic tradition, and with its great ex-master Aldo Rossi, who was our professor in the early 70s. And in some way this project is also an homage to Aldo Rossi, because several aspects are tracing back to his thinking in urbanistic terms. Here you can see that the building is somehow a hybrid of something very traditional and very contemporary, with this simple move of the geometry from an orthogonal grid into a grid which is taking on the angle of an adjacent side street. So this move is inspiring the whole geometry of the building and makes the difference between an orthogonal structure. As I said before, Aldo Rossi certainly has an impact in this project through his analysis of the Lombardian landscape, which is the linearity, the repetition that he admired so much. And maybe in his best work in the Galaratese building, this is evident and somehow is like a project that has had a lot of inspiration when we were young students at the ETH. This building that you see on the right-hand side, Galaratese, is also remindful of the glorious period of the 60s and 70s in Italy, where intellectuals, of course, like Feltrinelli were active, but also filmmakers like Pasolini, Antonioni, who all were very inspirational for our thinking today. Another important source for this project is Gothic and Neo-Gothic, which is very strong in Milano. Milano is not a Romanesque city, and not necessarily a Renaissance city like Florence and in the Tuscany, but the Gothic has left behind very important traces, like you see in these major monuments. Of course, the Gothic Cathedral of the Duomo, but also the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele and the famous Torre Velasca. So somehow this building inscribes itself in these two Milanese traditions of linearity and of Gothic structures, but of course introduces a new element, which is this totally exposed nakedness and the transparency between garden and the street. The building, of course, also takes on board another element, which is the traditional house form, the Urform of the house, which, as you know, has been a potential that we always put in the foreground. We believe this is a typology that is so open and so free and gives us so many possibilities to find exact and very concrete proposals in totally different sites. And interestingly, this typology, like here you can see in the case of the house in Lyman, that seems to be a normal house, totally conventional, sitting in the landscape, but turns out to be lifted and undermining the contemporary, undermining the everyday perception of a building. So somehow, what I want to say is the house form not only allows for a wide range that has been given us opportunities in different parts of the world, but at the same time, and this is a quite interesting paradox, it is a form that is so expressive and so clear, but at the same time leaves behind the author. The author is not necessarily Herzog De Meuron, because it's a form that existed long before and gives us through this some freedom. I would almost like to say it, despite its figurative, very figurative expression, it almost has an abstract effect. A very recent moment where we exploited this is in the Parish Museum in Long Island, outside New York. The building here you see, the shack, is the studio, artist studio, that also uses this form. And Long Island has been the place where very, very famous American artists have had their studios. This is Jackson Pollock here in the front on his way to his studio. And Long Island has been the equivalent somehow to France's Impressionist landscapes, where the painters in the 19th century went outdoor, en plein air, to discover new ways to paint and to find inspiration from the kind of light that you don't find inside the building. So the studios that were built on Long Island, long before, of course, Jackson Pollock and de Kooning and others, were used by American expressionists because of the special light conditions that you can see. There is waterscapes on both sides of this part of the island, which create very, very strange and extraordinary light conditions. And the studios the artists had there were exploiting this light. So we were, before we were commissioned to do this Parish Museum, we studied all these artist studios, de Kooning, Lichtenstein, Chase and Porter being these early painters, and of course also other artists. And the original project, the first project, was a kind of a conglomerate of individual pieces which were all mimicking, rebuilding the different artist studios, okay, in a more abstract way, but we were interested in rebuilding exactly the galleries exactly in a way that they would mimic exactly the kind of light, the way the daylight and artificial light were cooperating and co-acting together. Because the parish is a rural museum, is not an urban museum, so the galleries should not be loft galleries. They shouldn't be normal galleries that you find everywhere. There are so many, and there are too many perhaps, museums. So this kind of approach to artist studios and turn artist studios in galleries in this kind of conglomerate way was certainly a very new and interesting start. The crisis hit the project, so we couldn't do it exactly like this, so we had to give it up, which was, of course, a sad moment, and at the same time, you know, all of you who are architects, that this is unfortunately something that happens quite often, that you have to give up and you have to start again. And we liked, in fact, this idea to have broken down the scale of the museum down to an individual piece that is the gallery or is the artist studio. And even if we did not anymore want to do this conglomerate structure that is very costly and has too many details that we couldn't control for the amount of money that was available, we said we want to do an extruded version of it, a very simple version of it, which lives on behalf of other ingredients and other qualities, which is the simplicity, the total simplicity and the reduction of the means. So we extruded this simple house form into this double form, which organizes galleries alongside the central corridor. So every gallery would be housed, literally housed in one of these wings, and they would reflect the simplicity that we found in the artist studio with exposed beams, exposed ceilings, simple light conditions, but nevertheless having this impact in the landscape, more like a rural shack than a museum. And the inside, as I said, reflects this, and a kind of a gallery that you would never do in such a way in Manhattan or in another city. But yes, it makes a lot of sense with the kind of art they have there and with the kind of inside-outside relationship of that building. So I think I want to show this project for two reasons. First of all, that you have to change and you have to find a new approach, like a new start. This is in itself a potential to rethink what was actually the essential idea. Was this concentration and the use of the artist studio, the artist being the one person who best knows what he or she needs and wants to present or to work, to generate even the artwork, and then to transform it into a collective form, which in this case is organized along this central corridor, is a stretched form, has a central entrance space, and at the both ends is a little fuzzy, so it leaves room for public uses, outdoor dinners, etc. The other ingredient is, as I said, simplicity, and is also somehow a rawness that you don't find otherwise in America. America is not a country where concrete is very popular. It's more a steel and wood culture in construction, as you may know. The stud walls are all over. So we wanted to have a real concrete wall with a real concrete bench, which was really rough and simple, so you could feel the material when you sit on it. And feeling this material and be able to touch it, not only to see it, is also certainly one of the major potentials that we like to stretch and like to put in the foreground whenever there's a possibility. This bench also became a kind of a trademark because of the building, for its length and its visibility, but also because for the simple reason that the sun hits the building on this wall and people like to use it and hang around and play on it. Extruded forms and the house form in its diversity can also be tested and perceived in this project we have done for Vitra and opened it about 2 years ago now. A building that from the beginning has become very popular with the people and with also the client's needs to expose his products. As you know, Vitra produces furniture and interiors, and they needed a building which is a kind of a mixture of a museum and a showroom. And this building belongs to this other group of potentials that we find in stacks, piles, and conglomerates, where each piece remains one thing. You could also, of course, take the parish that we saw before, where every gallery remains like its own unit within the whole. And the whole needs the single piece and vice versa. And it generates whole pieces or sculptural pieces that otherwise you would not be able to generate. So somehow in this case, this is the Vitra site, this is Sadawando, this is Frank Gehry, this is Buckminster Fuller, this is Alvaro Sisa, this is Zaha Hadid, this is Sejima, and this is our Vitra house. Is actually not simple building because of its conglomerate structure. It allows for interior spaces, it allows to host people inside the building and allows for an inside-outside relationship that in a hermetic building you would not have. This kind of stack was there very early. As you can see in this sketch that I showed, this was a very early idea. And we then tested it, of course, back and forth. So this seemingly random arrangement was based on precision and definition. The advantage of this stack, of the single form, the single Urform, single house form is there and offers inside an experience like in a normal house, especially in this long loft-like space. But through its crashing into each other, we create surprising spaces which otherwise we would need to design, you know, from inside out. And with this method or strategy of taking this simple form and stacking it and crashing it into each other, we achieve surprising forms and unexpected spatial qualities that we were looking for. These intersections and these unexpected forms are special places for display, but also for movement through the building. You can see that these movements through the building, these vertical connections, are like a special architectural feature inside this conglomerate structure. These stairs leading up and down, all through the building, intersecting with the more linear and lofty spaces, opening up views into the landscape, and allowing for surprising spaces where the display of the Vitra collection finds very different conditions. The building doesn't look like it is a concrete building, but indeed it is all very hermetic, so the impression you get from outside that it is a one kind of a thing is true. So there's no decoration, it's a real construction out of one thing. So somehow there was a temptation to leave it like this, even if we would have needed to add insulation. But the concrete, the exposed concrete, seemed too harsh for us. It seemed too masculine in a way that it was looking too aggressive almost. So we stood away from this idea and found other ideas. We tested many things. we wanted especially also the roof surface and the wall surface to be perceived as one thing. And we choose this rather dark color in contrast to the Gehry Museum, which is all white. We were looking for a contrast and also a distance so that every building and every piece on that site could live in itself without being affected or without being seen as a rival to the other one. As you can see, this building also has several floors, so the building also allows to overlook the site of Ritra and to perceive the landscape around Basel. This is on the German side of Basel, our hometown, which is where different landscapes come together. The Black Forest, the southern part of the Black Forest, the Vosges on the French side, and the Jura mountain chain in the southern side on the Swiss side. As I mentioned at the beginning, this conglomerate, this stack of this expanded form not only allows simple lofty spaces, complex intersected spaces, but also embraces the outdoor space in a way that it allows for people to come together, to congregate, and a kind of a covered plaza, kind of a place to meet, which is very welcome on the site of Vitra. Finally, a project in Mexico that we are very, very glad we can work on this, which is in fact also a kind of a conglomerate or an assemblage of units, again of gallery spaces, but of course because this is an urban museum with a serious collection, with grand spaces which are stuck together in a very precise way, unlike the Vitra, which seems random, which is it is also not, but here we wanted a much more precise and geometrically clear distribution of the gallery spaces, which clearly are orienting themselves towards the landscape and the sky. So in some way, this orientation here is a lot to do with its orientation in the given landscape. The newness, certainly we will come back to this, is not so much that it's also about the whole and the single piece, but it is also about how you can walk through a museum where the spaces are rather classical, but you have to orient yourself once you walk through this every once again. And this, we believe, is not to confuse people, but on the contrary, to reassure them and to find their place inside the gallery whenever they walk through the building. The building sits on stilts above a park at the border of this barranco in Guadalajara, with of course an amazing view, but also with a precarious situation right at the edge of this cliff. And it sits there very precisely. It sits there with using the galleries to orient itself in the space, in the natural space and in the urban space. And this coming together of museum, nature and city is very important also for social reasons. This plan here of Guadalajara shows the division of the wealthy and rich on the left-hand side, where we depicted all the swimming pools, and the right-hand side, where there are no swimming pools, is where the poor are living. So this axis, which is leading to the park of the museum, is in some way a separation line, but is also a line that you can see as a place where people congregate and come together and use the park to come together and use the museum as a place which is there really for everybody and is not detached from the city, as was the previous project, that not only as a tower was a rather unpractical typology, but also a building that says, I'm away from you, I am detached from the park. And we wanted at the opposite, we wanted to bring it back in the park so that that axis that you can see here is a place where people would go to the park and would also use the museum to go under and use the museum as un techo, a roofscape that is giving shade and is a place to congregate. Is also a place for outdoor activities, as opposed to previous design where the building was beyond that cliff, detached from the public ground of the city. This is how we plan to lift the building. The construction has started and is now more or less at this height. And this is the floor plan again of the galleries. As I said before, we believe the way you walk through the galleries, and always once you go from one gallery to the next one, you have to reorient yourself. And you have small openings where you can find, where you can look outside and can find an orientation also in the landscape. Is totally new and hasn't been built anywhere else. And we believe it's a very interesting change to the more linear organization in other museums. Also here, the architecture is very straightforward and naked and robust and seems to grow out of the ground and of the nature of the rocky soil. The galleries have daylight. A lot of them have daylight. They are very simple, no bullshit kind of galleries. With, as I said, also view outs. That's the la obra en este momento. And this is what I mentioned, that in some way these galleries are like big rocks out of which the cliff, the barranco, is built. So in some way it's also related to nature, as you will see now in the next potential group, which is what I would call undecorated shed, as opposed to the famous decorated shed that Venturi was bringing up in the 60s. And undecorated shed is, of course, indeed the opposite, in that a decoration is always an application to something that is not needed, or is just a kind of a PR, or it's just a kind of a signal of showing this is whatever what it is. But in fact, is not related physically and sensually to the building. Doesn't really impact what is in the building. Is something that is added and could be left away without changing anything besides the iconic appearance. And very much on purpose, I mention here or introduce here the undecorated shed and take Dominus and another project as an example where the cladding, the skin, is more than a skin, is in fact something which is so powerful that it impacts a building visually but also energetically, very strongly, and would totally change would one leave it out. In this case, we took the stone that we found in the landscape. It's a volcanic gray blackish stone that protects and controls the climate of the very fragile wine production and filters in daylight in a very strongly controlled and steered way. We also developed this technique of the gabions, which we found in ordinary riverbeds, and discovered its potential to become a building material which is not only very inert, very beautiful and very sensual in touching it, but offers an amazing range of ways that light comes in, that heat is held back, that light is reflecting on other surfaces, like the glass surface that is set behind in the office part of the building. And as I said at the beginning, this very simple form has this skin of stones around, but this skin of stone really works towards the inside, is not separated from what happens inside, but really physically and visually impacts the building into this most interior core. On top of what I said, the amazing thing with these stones is that they are both so heavy and so inert and so powerful, and at the same time they look like transparent and like almost lingerie, like lace. So what also happens, of course, is the building with this material that we found in the landscape, and this is also a former Indian landscape, a very fertile land, Dominus being perhaps the greatest wine in America. The building seems to really be coming out of the ground, and sometimes at some days, at some light conditions, the building seems to totally disappear, almost like a stealth. So not only it's undecorated in that it impacts the inside, but also it impacts the outside, or how it sits in the exterior in the landscape. This is an image that shows the building from west, where the sunset is setting, and touches the building and reveals the metallic surface of the gabion. So not only the stones are playing a role in this visual perception, but also the metallic surface of the gabion. A totally new project is for Ricola. This is a very large building. It's going to be the largest earth building in Europe. Ricola is a client that we have been working for already several times. You may know the warehouse, l'Almacén, that we did in the early 80s, and various other buildings. So finally they let us do this project, which we want to do a bit comparable to Dominus, out of the material that we find in the place. And this is area outside Basel, not far away from Basel, where the chalky ground, the chalky soil has a very good qualities which can be used as a building material. The Laufen ceramics that you may know is originally based there, and could develop its potential, its industrial potential, because of this ground. And it's a very interesting building material that we try to exploit now with this project. And it's a project we long ago wanted to do. And if we didn't do a building like this, you know, then out of this material, then this is how buildings normally look like. These ugly industrial buildings, which are neither architecture nor machines, but this is how normally buildings happen there. And the client was ready to go away and to compact everything within a very simple organization, which is a simple concrete structure with heavy rammed earth walls. And the building is an almacén, also is a warehouse for dried herbs, which is the base product for the herb candies that Ricola is famous for worldwide. And you can imagine that inside this huge building, which has these earthy walls, we'll see the stacked herb, piled up dried herbs. The smell of these herbs in these earthy building will be a very interesting sensual appearance, and will almost have a church-like feeling. Currently, the production process is pretty low because we rented an industrial space which was pre-existing, where all these ingredients that we found right on the spot are being brought in, and in a kind of special process, in a kind of almost prefabrication type process, huge blocks of rammed earth are being produced to finally be erected on the site. And that's how more or less these earth blocks look like, and they withstand different weather conditions for decades and even centuries. Again, this material will, a bit like in Dominus, not just be a visually interesting thing, but has an amazing energetic quality, also in its cost, also in not needing to be transported from somewhere far away to be brought here. Little energy consumption to produce it. So it's in many ways a very contemporary material, and we hope to one day also be able to introduce it in other parts of the world, because basically you can produce buildings out of earth anywhere on this planet. And that's how it will be integrated in the landscape. Finally, the last 3 projects is dealing with the issue of archaeology, or let's say the potential that I would like to address here is how we can enhance the found, how we can do out of what exists in a place we go some unexpected qualities that we should try to discover and develop before we destroy everything, or before we try to destroy it with what everybody believes is a fancy design. Again, I start with the Tate. As you may know, the Tate is currently being built in its 2nd phase, and will be adding piece that you see here on the southern part of the building. This is TM1, and this is this tower-like object that literally grows out of the ground of the former oil tank area. This is the former boiler house, that's the turbine hall, and that's the switch station here. That is part of the expansion project TM2, which is a huge operation digging out. This is Tate 1 with the turbine hall. That's the switch house which will host new galleries. And I'm talking about this underground piece, which is where the oil tanks were, through 3 huge cylindric forms in heavy concrete that we inaugurated, opened as a first phase of phase 2 last summer. And this diagram shows in the section how the 2nd phase will be adding the quality and enhancing the quality of the first Tate modern phase, with the turbine hall in the middle, and this tower with different functions, not only gallery spaces, but also many social functions, adding the offerings of Tate modern. And the whole project grows out of this underground tanks, which is very heavy concrete, huge, thick walls. Some are just rammed concrete, so it's not concrete as we know it from today, but the whole structure, the whole brick tower piece that grows out is actually based on a concrete skeleton that you can see here in its naked form. And that's an image that shows the grandness of these tanks and the potential they have to become display spaces for artists who do not work in the traditional way for traditional gallery space, but this is how you can, the Tate will be offering more industrial spaces, more rough spaces, more found spaces, more spaces for performing arts and for film and video. And also, as opposed to the Tate modern, the first phase, we wanted to juxtapose this in a rougher way. So we left most of these walls as they were. So it's a mixture of new concrete and old concrete. And we cut out windows out of the concrete. And artists have, in the first phase in last summer, started to install some pieces in such spaces. And this space, this kind of underground space, will be naturally linked and connected with the turbine hall, which in the future will offer life and artistic life also on both sides. So literally every space is being exploited for different kinds of artist installations and performing art. This is one of the tanks is almost exclusively for music and performing arts. The Caixa Forum in Spain is also a project where this archaeological moment was very key and very important. First of all, to remove again in a dramatic action somehow to free the building from other pieces that were preventing the building to be seen and connected to real city life. This is Paseo del Prado. But the building was undiscovered and nobody knew the building. And now it has become a very important tourist destination because the building literally has become visible. And has become visible and also in its beauty that it has had from the beginning. It's right across from the street from Museo del Prado, so in the most central location, even more central than Reina Sofia and the Thyssen collection, which are here and there. This is Thyssen, this is El Prado. So the potential of a building like Nick Serota, who discovered the potential of the Tate being located right across the St. Paul's Cathedral, has now become such a central space, and 15 years ago it did not exist in the mentality and in the mental map of people, and also not in the physical map. The same is right for this building, which we somehow admired in its very Spanish appearance, where in this very almost forgotten beauty. And unfortunately, we could not, unlike in the Tate, use the spaces as they were. The bank, the client simply wanted much more space and different spaces, so we had to find a way to keep the building, but to alter it. So again, in a very iconoclastic move already, we chopped it off from the ground so that we could build under it and on top of it. We could build under it and on top of it, and at the same time, the main interest is what has happened here, because the building standing on the ground was not leaving any space for the people, for the public, for the city, for the people of City of Madrid. So this is the covered plaza that is a real contribution. And at the same time, it reveals the underground like a building under it and something on top. This top was a big issue, how to do it, and we simply shaped it according to the neighbor buildings, the roofscape, with these cuts here, which may be ugly, but they helped us in their form to bring daylight into the building. So somehow they are very formal, but again, we feel innocent about their creation because they are inspired by the neighbors and they are very pragmatic and somehow allow for light come in a pretty beautiful way, and also allow for patios or light conditions for offices and restaurants and bars that are on the top of the building. This section, or this chopping off kind of a process, allowed to integrate the auditorium on the ground underneath, then the lobby floor and classical gallery floors in level 2 and 3. The underground was inspired as the rooftop by this kind of steel and rust that we created with digital processes that allowed for transparency on the top floor and for this kind of acoustic measurements in the ground floor. So these huge spaces literally could not have been brought into the existing structure without making these cuts and these strategic operations. So the galleries are here for contemporary art, for modern art, but also for more classical exhibitions. As you may know, the program of the Geisha is very wide, and that's why the galleries are rather neutral and are not affected by the outside. But on the contrary, the drill, that is the staircase, the vertical drill, connects all the floors and connects with the auditorium underneath and with the top floor that you saw before. But it drills also through the main lobby, which is hovering above the covered plaza, which is left open in its metallic, almost machine-like quality, and which leads down to this covered plaza, which is separating the underground world and the upper gallery floors, and makes way for access and connects to the Paseo del Prado, to the outside. And very helpful, of course, is also the green wall that we collaborated with Patrick Blanc. Finally, the last project I show here in this chapter in an archaeological way, how to enhance the found, is the Serpentine Gallery pavilion that we could do last summer together with Ai Weiwei, our artist friend, who unfortunately could not leave China, so we had to work together over Skype, which we could of course only do because we've been working together on many projects in the last 10 years, and this certainly was a bit sad, but also a lot of fun finally to do it. From the beginning, we found it difficult to do this project because so many pavilions have been done, 11 have been done, and we would add the 12th pavilion. So how could we do a new object? And we wanted to step away from the creation of another object. So very naturally, almost by instinct, we said we would like to go underground, and the first sketches were dealing with this idea of going underground, and we were quite aware very soon that going underground we would find surface water, because London is very flat and very low, and the water flooding is all over. And we indeed were digging very soon some holes because we wanted to become aware what is the potential of this going underground. And indeed the water came up very soon, so we knew that digging out and going totally underground was not so easy as we had planned here, where we wanted to go underground and reveal a kind of an underground pound, a bit almost in the tradition of the Mexican cenotes. This is an image that shows Pierre and me together with Ai Weiwei working over Skype and vice versa, and showing sketches each other, and finally finding it interesting, this kind of stepping away from objects. But maybe we said we don't need really to go totally underground. We can go half underground and then cover this site with a simple kind of a cover, like this or so. And we also said once you're underground, or once we go down, you should have a landscape. We should see something, and we were trying to figure out what that could be, this landscape. And we're creating all kinds of pixelized and other organic forms, like fake nature, whatever, that you can see here. till we, you know, then of course discovering also that we had to respect existing electric cables, and we found out, of course, of our colleagues that they left their traces and they have had very heavy foundations, even if the park looked so innocent. We said, wow, we have so much there. Why do we create something new? And we reconstructed virtually the landscape or the traces of the previous pavilions. We traced them back and found in books and catalogs what other architects had done in the previous years, in how it looked as a form, in plan, and we laid it over each other and found out that it made quite a beautiful and kind of a labyrinthic line drawing. We then tried to also discover other structures, the real foundations, the concrete blocks or steel blocks that they have used, so that we created different patterns of the rooftops, of the foundations, of walls. So it was amazingly rich heritage, a kind of an archaeology, a virtual archaeology that we reconstructed, and it offered us, without our own active intervention, a lot of what existed. So the existing world was the real potential that we found there, and we could do it without being ironic or without being in any way taking anybody who has done something before us in a way that would look not very serious. But on the contrary, we found it interesting to somehow bring back all the previous designs and destroy them at the same time, in that they are lying on top of each other. The issue of columns, of how to support the roof, would help us in this process, because we said there were 11 pavilions, so each previous pavilion should have its own column, like a person that stands there instead of the previous pavilion. On one of the leftovers, or the reconstructed leftovers of the previous pavilions, we erected one column, like a personality, remindful of the pavilion of this or that architect. So we created a whole collection of different column forms, which are not in a modernistic tradition, but would help shape the space underneath the roof, working like a backrest or like a wall or like a simple, very thin structure, whatever was needed. And we brought it back to the model that we tested and arranged the project step by step. And always we had in mind to cover it with also a round form, the round form being the one that least would be in contact with an existing building but would be independent. We just chopped it off on that side so that we could bring in a stair that people could step on it. We imagined how people could sit there, could use it as an auditorium, as a cafe place, as a place to play or do homework or whatever. We also were tempted already months ago by cork as a material, because we've been offered to do something with this material and didn't really know what could be done, because it's an old-fashioned material with an amazing quality, because it's so soft, it's smelly, it feels good, it's very warm when you sit on it. So it was, I think, a brilliant moment when we found this could be, wow, this could be really the moment to use it. And because it has a temporary moment, but also it has something very old-fashioned. In this, also something that is, again, something that you would expect in a park. This is already an advanced moment where the cork pieces were cut and be brought to the site. Before we did models in cork, where you can see the juxtaposition and also the overlay of the different traces and foundations, and this thin metal cover that would be filled with a 5 centimeter max layer of rainwater, reflecting the London sky that is so changing, is with the changing weather, and especially with the clouds and the rainy weather London very often has in summer. So we knew that this water surface would do the rest. So we have this earth, this kind of history-laden, earthy part, and that is relating to the feet and to the ground, and the roof, which is relating to the sky and to the elements. And these two things together would make that summer pavilion. So for those who have not seen it, you can take a glimpse of how you would feel underneath. You can imagine the smell of the cork, the smell of the grass outside, of the London park feeling, which is so intensely green, and that would be enhanced also with this thin opening, and then with the mirroring water surface on top. Many events take place, as you may know, the marathon that Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Julia Payton are organizing. So it was a big success in that. It was really very vibrant, and people really like to use it. And so ultimately, they could accept going slightly down. Yes, that's the last image. I thank you very much for your attention. Muchas gracias.